Imagine looking at your body and realizing that not all fat is created equal. Some layers rest quietly beneath the skin, soft and visible, while another type, hidden deep within, wraps itself around your organs, silently influencing your health. This is visceral fat, a substance that, despite being unseen, plays a profound role in how your body functions, how your hormones communicate, and how your metabolism operates. For those over 60, the stakes are even higher. The natural slowing of metabolism, subtle changes in hormone levels, and decades of accumulated lifestyle patterns make visceral fat particularly stubborn. Yet the human body, even in later decades, retains a remarkable capacity to adapt, respond, and transform when guided by thoughtful, science-based strategies. Visceral fat is metabolically active, producing hormones and inflammatory molecules that can affect everything from insulin sensitivity to cardiovascular function. It is not simply a storage depot, it is a signaling center, quietly influencing the balance of health within your body. The key to reducing it lies not in drastic diets or excessive exercise, but in creating conditions that encourage your body to tap into these deep reserves intelligently. When energy intake is adjusted appropriately and movement is targeted to enhance metabolic function, the body shifts from storing fat to releasing it, signaling through hormonal pathways that energy can be safely mobilized. Muscle tissue plays an essential role in this process. After 60, muscle mass naturally declines, a phenomenon that slows metabolism and reduces the body's capacity to burn fat. Engaging in strength-focused activity stimulates muscles to take up glucose and fatty acids more efficiently, encouraging visceral fat to be used as fuel. Each contraction of muscle cells is more than a mechanical action. It is a biochemical signal, a message to the surrounding tissue that energy must be mobilized and utilized. The interplay between muscles, fat, and hormones is a dance of intelligence, where the body gradually learns to restore balance, improve insulin sensitivity, and reduce inflammatory signals emanating from deep within the abdomen. Nutrition acts as both a trigger and a support system. Consuming foods that stabilize blood sugar, provide protein for muscle repair, and offer micronutrients for energy metabolism encourages the body to shift away from storing fat toward burning it efficiently. Small adjustments, repeated consistently, create a cumulative effect that can be profound over 30 days. Hydration, timing of meals, and quality of nutrients all contribute to the body's readiness to respond to these interventions, guiding visceral fat toward transformation without imposing undue stress on internal systems. Even the cardiovascular and nervous systems participate subtly in this process. Increased circulation delivers oxygen and nutrients to active tissues, while hormonal shifts communicate the body's readiness for fat mobilization. Energy levels stabilize, cognitive function remains supported, and the body begins to feel lighter internally, even before external changes become visible. Within a carefully orchestrated 30-day period, the body demonstrates its remarkable resilience, reducing visceral fat not through coercion, but through alignment with its natural intelligence, showing that even after 60, meaningful transformation is both possible and sustainable. Visceral fat is not simply an inert layer of stored energy. It is a biologically active tissue that participates constantly in the body's internal conversation. Unlike subcutaneous fat, which lies just beneath the skin, visceral fat surrounds vital organs such as the liver, pancreas, and intestines, placing it in a powerful position to influence metabolic health. This deep fat tissue releases hormones, fatty acids, and inflammatory molecules directly into the portal circulation, meaning its signals reach the liver first and shape how the body manages blood sugar, cholesterol, and energy balance. Over time, this close proximity allows visceral fat to quietly alter insulin sensitivity, promote chronic low-grade inflammation, and increase the risk of cardiovascular disease, making its presence far more consequential than its size alone might suggest. After the age of 60, these effects become more pronounced. Hormonal shifts, including lower growth hormone and shifts in sex hormones, alter how fat is stored and mobilized. The body becomes more efficient at storing energy and more cautious about releasing it, especially from deep reserves. Visceral fat responds readily to these signals, expanding even when overall weight changes are modest. This is why many people notice changes in waist circumference without dramatic changes on the scale. The body is not failing, it is adapting to signals of aging and perceived energy security. Understanding this reframes visceral fat not as an enemy, but as a responsive tissue reacting to internal cues. The inflammatory nature of visceral fat deserves particular attention. The molecules it releases can interfere with insulin signaling, making it harder for cells to absorb glucose efficiently. As a result, the pancreas compensates by producing more insulin, creating a cycle that further encourages fat storage. This process unfolds gradually, often without obvious symptoms, yet it influences energy levels, cognitive clarity, and long-term metabolic health. Reducing visceral fat interrupts this cycle, lowering inflammatory signaling and restoring a more balanced hormonal environment. This is why even modest reductions in visceral fat can lead to outsized improvements in health markers, such as blood sugar control and lipid profiles. What makes visceral fat especially relevant later in life is its responsiveness to targeted metabolic changes. It is highly sensitive to hormonal shifts related to insulin, adrenaline, and growth hormone. When these signals change, visceral fat responds quickly, releasing fatty acids to be used as fuel. This responsiveness means that strategic interventions can have meaningful effects within weeks rather than years. The body does not require extreme deprivation to initiate this process. It requires clear, consistent signals that energy can be mobilized safely. Recognizing visceral fat as a metabolically active participant rather than a passive burden changes how we approach health after 60. Instead of focusing solely on weight loss, attention shifts to restoring hormonal balance, reducing inflammation, and improving metabolic communication between tissues. When these internal conversations improve, visceral fat naturally recedes, and the body regains a sense of internal equilibrium, supporting longevity, vitality, and resilience well beyond the visible changes at the waistline. Reducing visceral fat is less about forceful restriction and more about creating the right metabolic conditions for the body to feel safe, releasing its deepest energy reserves. Extreme diets often fail because they trigger protective responses, convincing the body that scarcity is imminent and that stored fat must be preserved. Visceral fat, in particular, responds quickly to stress hormones such as cortisol, tightening its grip on energy when the system senses instability. Instead of shrinking, it may expand, reinforcing the very problem one is trying to solve. This is why targeted energy mobilization guided by consistency and biological timing is far more effective than aggressive calorie cutting, especially after 60. When energy intake is adjusted thoughtfully, insulin levels begin to stabilize. Insulin is a powerful storage hormone, and when it remains elevated throughout the day due to frequent eating or high glycemic foods, visceral fat is constantly signaled to store energy. Lowering insulin through strategic meal timing and balanced nutrition opens the door for fat cells to release fatty acids. This shift does not happen instantly, but once the body senses a predictable pattern, it begins to adapt. The liver, which sits at the center of metabolic regulation, becomes more efficient at processing fatty acids, converting them into usable energy, rather than directing them back into storage. Visceral fat is particularly sensitive to these changes because of its proximity to the liver and its role in supplying energy during perceived need. When the body experiences mild, controlled energy demand, visceral fat becomes a readily available fuel source. This demand can come from gentle fasting windows, reduced evening caloric intake, or consistent daily movement. The key is that the signal remains calm and repeatable.
The body learns that it can rely on stored energy without entering a stress response, allowing fat mobilization to occur without muscle loss or metabolic slowdown. Hormones like growth hormone and adrenaline participate in this process. With age, growth hormone naturally declines, reducing the body's ability to mobilize fat. However, targeted energy demand can stimulate its release, especially during periods of lower insulin. Adrenaline, released in response to movement or mild challenge, activates enzymes within fat cells that break down stored triglycerides. When these hormonal signals align, visceral fat begins to shrink, not because it is being attacked, but because it is being used. This reframing is critical, as the body is far more cooperative when it perceives balance rather than threat. Over time, these metabolic-friendly conditions reshape the internal environment. Inflammatory signaling decreases.
Muscle tissue serves as one of the most powerful regulators of visceral fat, particularly after the age of 60, when natural changes in physiology begin to shift the balance between storage and expenditure. Muscle is not simply a structure for movement, it is a metabolically active organ that communicates continuously with fat tissue, the liver, and the endocrine system. Each time muscle fibers contract, they send signals that increase the uptake of glucose and fatty acids from the bloodstream, reducing the need for insulin and easing the metabolic burden placed on visceral fat. This interaction positions muscle as a central mediator in the process of fat reduction, influencing not only energy use, but also hormonal balance and inflammation. As people age, muscle mass gradually declines, a process that slows metabolism and reduces the body's ability to use energy efficiently. This decline creates an environment where visceral fat can accumulate even without excess calorie intake. Strength-focused activity counteracts this trend by stimulating muscle protein synthesis and preserving lean tissue. When muscles are engaged regularly, they demand energy, and visceral fat responds by releasing fatty acids to meet this need. This relationship is subtle but profound, as it shifts the body from a state of energy conservation to one of controlled energy utilization. The result is not only a reduction in visceral fat, but also improved strength, balance, and functional independence. Muscle activity also influences insulin sensitivity, a critical factor in visceral fat accumulation. Active muscle cells become more responsive to insulin, allowing glucose to be absorbed efficiently without excessive hormonal signaling. This reduces the constant insulin exposure that encourages visceral fat storage. Over time, improved insulin sensitivity decreases the inflammatory output of visceral fat, easing its impact on cardiovascular and metabolic health. This process unfolds gradually, reinforcing the idea that muscle engagement does not need to be extreme to be effective. Consistency and intentionality are sufficient to drive meaningful change. The biochemical effects of muscle contraction extend even further. During strength-focused activity, muscles release signaling molecules known as myokines, which influence fat metabolism, immune function, and energy balance. Some of these myokines encourage fat oxidation and reduce inflammation, creating a systemic environment that favors visceral fat reduction. This internal communication highlights the body's integrated design, where one tissue supports the health of another through coordinated signaling rather than isolated effort. Over weeks of consistent muscle engagement, the body recalibrates its energy priorities. Visceral fat becomes less central as a storage reserve and more integrated into the flow of daily energy use. Muscles grow more efficient, mitochondria increase in number and function, and the body regains a sense of metabolic flexibility. This process demonstrates that muscle is not merely a passive consumer of energy, but an active guide, directing how and where fat is used. For individuals over 60, this relationship offers a powerful and sustainable pathway to reducing visceral fat while preserving strength, resilience, and overall vitality.
Nutrition and daily lifestyle choices act as the quiet architects of visceral fat reduction, shaping the internal environment in which the body decides whether to store energy or release it. After 60, the body becomes more sensitive to the quality and timing of what it receives, not just the quantity. Blood sugar stability emerges as a central theme because repeated spikes in glucose and insulin send a continuous message of abundance, encouraging visceral fat to remain in place. When meals are composed in a way that slows digestion, balances carbohydrates with protein and healthy fats, and respects natural hunger cues, insulin signaling becomes calmer and more deliberate. This calmer hormonal landscape allows fat tissue to relax its grip on stored energy. Protein plays a particularly important role in this process. Adequate protein intake supports muscle maintenance and repair, which indirectly increases energy demand and improves insulin sensitivity. It also enhances satiety, reducing the constant urge to snack that keeps insulin elevated throughout the day. When protein is distributed evenly across meals, it creates a steady metabolic rhythm that the body can trust. Visceral fat responds favorably to this rhythm because it no longer receives conflicting signals of feast and famine within short spans. Instead, it becomes part of a predictable energy system where release and use of fat feels safe. Micronutrients, though often overlooked, are essential for the biochemical pathways that govern fat metabolism. Minerals such as magnesium and zinc, along with vitamins involved in mitochondrial function, help enzymes operate efficiently. Without these nutrients, the body struggles to convert stored fat into usable energy, even when hormonal conditions are favorable. Whole, minimally processed foods naturally provide these compounds, supporting the body's ability to mobilize visceral fat without strain. Hydration further supports this process by maintaining blood volume, circulation, and cellular communication, ensuring that fatty acids can be transported smoothly to tissues that need them. Lifestyle consistency amplifies the effects of nutrition. Regular sleep patterns regulate hormones that influence appetite, stress, and fat storage. Poor sleep elevates cortisol and disrupts insulin sensitivity, conditions under which visceral fat thrives. When sleep becomes consistent and restorative, hormonal signaling shifts toward repair and balance. Gentle daily movement, exposure to natural light, and moments of mental calm further reinforce this internal stability. These elements may seem subtle, but together they create a powerful message to the body that conditions are supportive, not threatening. Over time, these consistent choices reshape how the body manages energy. Visceral fat becomes less inflamed, less hormonally active, and more willing to release stored fuel. The process is gradual but deeply sustainable, rooted in respect for the body's signals rather than attempts to override them. By nourishing the body thoughtfully and aligning daily habits with biological needs, visceral fat reduction becomes a natural outcome of improved internal harmony, especially in later decades of life. Over a focused 30-day period, the body reveals its remarkable ability to adapt as a whole system rather than as isolated parts, especially when visceral fat reduction is approached with consistency and respect for physiology. Hormones begin to recalibrate in response to improved metabolic signals, creating an internal environment that favors fat utilization over storage. Insulin becomes more efficient, requiring less effort to manage blood glucose, while growth hormone and adrenaline find opportunities to support fat mobilization during periods of rest and activity. These shifts are subtle at first, but they accumulate steadily, guiding visceral fat toward gradual reduction without shocking the system. The cardiovascular system plays a supportive role in this adaptation. As circulation improves through regular movement and improved metabolic efficiency, oxygen and nutrients reach tissues more effectively. Fatty acids released from visceral stores are transported smoothly to muscles and the liver, where they can be converted into usable energy. Improved blood flow also reduces vascular stress and inflammation, creating conditions that support overall metabolic health. This systemic improvement reinforces the idea that reducing visceral fat is not a localized effort, but a coordinated response involving multiple physiological networks working in harmony. The nervous system responds as well, adjusting how the body perceives energy availability and stress. Consistent routines in eating, movement, and rest signal safety, allowing the nervous system to shift away from a state of chronic alertness. As hormones stabilize, the body becomes more willing to release stored fat, particularly from deep reserves that were previously guarded. Cognitive clarity often improves during this period, reflecting the brain's access to a more stable fuel supply. This mental shift further supports adherence to healthy patterns, creating a feedback loop that reinforces progress. Inflammation, a key factor associated with visceral fat, gradually diminishes as hormonal and metabolic balance improves. Lower inflammatory signaling reduces interference with insulin action and improves cellular communication. Tissues begin to operate more efficiently, and energy is allocated with greater precision. These internal changes may not always be immediately visible, but they represent meaningful improvements in long-term health and resilience. The body's systems become better synchronized, reducing the metabolic noise that often accompanies aging. By the end of 30 days, the body has learned a new rhythm. Visceral fat is no longer treated as a critical reserve to be protected at all costs, but as a flexible energy source that can be accessed when needed. Energy levels feel more stable, internal pressure eases, and the sense of physical lightness grows. This transformation arises not from force or urgency, but from alignment with the body's inherent intelligence, demonstrating that even later